Welcome, everyone, to Rutgers Football Live, where tonight we're going to talk about Rutgers, their future, their game against Wisconsin, their upcoming game against UCLA. And we will take your calls. And if you like the show, hit that like and subscribe button. So let's get right into it. Rutgers starts off the season 4-0, then loses 14-7 to Nebraska, and then suffers a demoralizing loss to Wisconsin, 42-7. So where's Rutgers going from here? Is Rutgers just going to be the perennial bottom dweller of the Big Ten? Or is Rutgers finally going to turn the corner under head coach Greg Schiano? So to have that discussion, let's talk about Rutgers, Wisconsin. The worst loss that Rutgers could have possibly suffered, a 42-7 defeat at the hands of a Wisconsin team that was defeated 38-21 by USC and 42-10 to Alabama. Quick recap of the Wisconsin game. Wisconsin, 547 total yards. Rutgers, 271. 240 yards passing for Braden Locke, the backup quarterback of Wisconsin. 103 for Ethan Kaliamakis of Rutgers. 309 yards rushing for Wisconsin against the 12th ranked rushing defense in the nation at the time. 168 yards for Rutgers. Yards per play, 7.3 for Wisconsin, 4 for Rutgers. 24 first downs for the Badgers, 13 first downs for the Scarlet Knights, and third down conversions, 7 of 14, 50% for Wisconsin, 5 of 17 for Rutgers. Time of possession, 34 minutes and 56 seconds for the Badgers, 25 minutes, 04 seconds for Rutgers. Tail of the tape, not good for Rutgers. Player statistics, Braden Locke, 20 of 28. Ethan Kaliamakis for Rutgers, 12 of 32. About 33% completion rate with 103 yards and 1 interception. Not acceptable. Tawi Walker for Wisconsin, 24 rushes, 198 yards for an 8.2 average. Rutgers star running back Kyle Monangai, 19 carries for 72 yards for a 3.8 yards per carry average. And as we saw, stuffed on a critical 4th and 1 in the second quarter. Wisconsin receiving, 6 players had at least 2 catches. Rutgers, we had more drop balls than we had catches. Christian Dremel, 2 receptions for 54 yards. Demir Miller, 4 receptions for 17 yards. Ben Black, 2 receptions for 15 yards. But the drop balls were the story for Rutgers. When you put all these factors together, you have one of the worst losses Rutgers could have possibly suffered at a time when they were trying to break through as a competitor in the Big Ten and as a national contender. Because Rutgers, historically, has not been very good. We all remember the Chris Ash era, but there was that era from 2001 to 2012 when Greg Schiano took over and in his 5th year of coaching, turned that program around. Well, he's in his 5th year of coaching in his second stint, and he's turning around the program again. But this Wisconsin game was a critical turning point, kind of like a fork in the road. Are we going to ascend and compete for the Big Ten championship, or are we going to be the Rutgers of old? Against Wisconsin, they were the Rutgers of old, and it did damage to their program, their reputation, and their ranking. So, moving forward, head coach Greg Schiano. Coach Schiano, we're looking forward to having you on this show to have a great discussion. And Coach Schiano has been the best coach in recent Rutgers history. Like I said, his first stint, he took over, and in his 5th year, he turned this program around to be relevant in college football. His second stint, yet again in his fifth year, turning it around to be relevant again until the Wisconsin game. So what did Coach Schiano say at his press conference after the Wisconsin game? Well, I pulled up a few quotes, which I'm going to comment on in a second. Coach Schiano, well, guys, it's been a tough 45 or so hours since the game. Yes, it was. The performance was unacceptable. Coach Shiano says it's no one major thing that caused this loss, but a bunch of little things. He talked about problems with details of execution. He talked about having a great group of players who were steadfastly committed to Rutgers. Now, before I go on, I want to read those again, just for those of you who may not have seen what I'm seeing here. A tough 45 hours since the game. Unacceptable. No one major thing was wrong. It was a bunch of little things, details of execution, and we have a great group of players. Coach Shiano, I have a tremendous amount of respect for you. We're looking forward to having you on this show. But I have to say, with all due respect, that's wrong. That is dead wrong. Your players did not show up to play. And I'm not blaming you. Like I said, I have a tremendous amount of respect for you. And it is not your fault that this happened. It is the fault of the players. They were, as I said, at a fork in the road where they could take one of two exits, stay as bottom dwellers in the Big Ten, or be contenders for the Big Ten championship. Well, they chose the former. And it showed, it looked like it, and they played with no life, no heart, and no passion. And that is not only a little detail, that is the biggest detail, because the player's mindset, the player's hunger, the player's desire to win, that's everything. That's what we call the intangibles. Let me repeat that, the intangibles. You can have a player who has all the talent in the world, but what happens when it gets tough? Do they fold? Or are they at their best? How do they handle pressure? How do they handle adhering to the scheme and playing with precision and discipline? How do they interact with other players? Do they appreciate the importance of the moment? And do they take every play as a life unto its own so that they don't regret bad plays in the past or worry about plays in the future? The intangibles are everything. And Rutgers players did not come with the intangibles. They had no heart. Their head wasn't in it. Their mindset wasn't strong. And you saw that on that 4th and 1 when Kyle Monangai couldn't get 1 yard in the second quarter to bring Rutgers back into the game. So, Coach Shiano, my message to you is this. Call it out for what it is. A horrible performance by these players who should be ashamed of themselves for that display, and who should feel the pain and the hurt of embarrassing themselves on television and in front of scouts and fans and embarrassing Rutgers University. Because that was the worst performance they could have possibly given in the most important game that they could possibly be playing in. So it's more than just unacceptable. And Coach, when you come on the show, we look forward to talking to you about how this program is growing and where you see it going in the future. Now, not to dwell on the past too much, let's look ahead to UCLA. Now, some people might say, UCLA, they're 1-5. Nothing to worry about for Rutgers and Piscataway. Well, if you think that, then I just say look at the 42-7 loss to Wisconsin. That essentially eclipsed the benefits and the positive reputation that Rutgers gained from its 21-18 victory over Washington and 26-23 victory over Virginia Tech. So, who is UCLA? UCLA is 1-5. First game, 16-13 over Hawaii. Now, I don't put any stock in that game because it's Hawaii. Hawaii is beautiful, but Hawaii is not a football school. Then we get to Indiana. The Hoosiers, 42-13 over UCLA. Although I will say later in the show, Cignetti should not expect any confetti because he's going to Columbus soon, and that will be the end of Indiana's Cinderella run. Then we have the Ducks of Oregon, who quacked against UCLA 34-13. LSU defeated UCLA 34-17. Penn State defeats UCLA 27-11. And then Minnesota wins by 4, 21-17 against UCLA. So Let's look at this a bit closer. UCLA is 1-5, but against LSU, they were close at the half. Against Penn State, only lost by 16. Against Minnesota, a team that beat who? USC. They only lost by 4. So UCLA is what we call a really good 1-5 team. Now, who for UCLA should we be concerned about? Well, let's look at their player statistics. Ethan Garbers, 92 of 153 for 60.1 pass completion rate for 1,101 yards with 4 TDs and 9 interceptions. Ethan, stop throwing the ball to the other team. What are you doing? Okay? Coaches, you got to coach this guy up so he throws to the right team. If he does that against Rutgers, throws to the right team, they're going to be a problem for the Scarlet Knights. Rushing, TJ Harden, 55 rushes for 166 yards with a 3-yard per carry average. Jalen Berger, 25 carries, 99 yards for 4 yards per carry. So nothing really sticks out about UCLA on offense. Receiving, TJ Harden, 21 receptions, 204 yards. Rico Flores, 12 receptions, 187 yards. Logan Loya, 15 receptions, 154 yards. Again, nothing really stands out. The defense is led by Carson Schwessinger, linebacker, 41 tackles. Kane Madrano, 27 tackles. KJ Wallace, 22 tackles. And Brian Addison, 20 tackles. So you have a UCLA team where no player stands out statistically, but UCLA is still a good team, as evidenced by the fact that when they went to Happy Valley, they were pretty much in the game for the first 3 quarters. Against Minnesota, they only lost by 4. Against LSU, they were tight with LSU in the first half. So this UCLA team is a team that can beat Rutgers. And before I get into my next 2 topics, I'm going to make a prediction. Rutgers, you're a little banged up. You just suffered a 42-7 loss. Are you going to get your head out of your you-know-what? Are you going to have the right mindset? Are you going to play to win? Are you going to take the exit to be the option to be a Big Ten contender instead of a Big Ten bottom dweller? My answer at this point is no. I'm predicting UCLA defeats Rutgers in Piscataway on Saturday. And now I'd like to turn to a broader discussion of the Big Ten. And what I'm going to do in this segment is I'm going to give you, based on the last few weeks' games, what I think of my Big Ten rankings. But before I do that, we have a caller. Duriel has called in, and we're looking forward to hearing his comments. Duriel, how are you doing? Good to see you.
I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm doing great. What's going on?
Nothing much. I tell you what, Rutgers will be down bad if they lose to UCLA. Listen, I understand every team is capable of beating anybody else this year. You got to show up, respect your opponents, but UCLA is probably the least proven team in the Big Ten this year. I mean, they only beat Hawaii by 3 points, and Hawaii is just atrocious of a football team. I understand they can compete for segments of football games, but they've never put together a full game of football against anybody. So if you lose to them, Rutgers has systemic issues that I think Greg Schiano needs to address.
I completely agree with you. I think that's a great point. And I think that Rutgers does have systemic issues they need to address. That team came out against Wisconsin and looked defeated from the get-go. Ethan Kaliamakis was terrible. Okay, sitting in the pocket way too long, indecisive in his passes. And sure, he had a couple of good throws here and there. Kyle Monangai on 4th and 1 gets stuffed at the line of scrimmage. Rutgers looked lifeless. And I think this UCLA team, they're 1-5. So I think that they're pissed off that they are at the bottom of the Big Ten. I think they're going to come out looking for a win, and I think they're going to get it. What do you think?
No, I said before the season started, I said UCLA is probably the worst team in the Big Ten. I have no reason to suggest this. I don't think Rutgers is going to blow them out, and I do agree Rutgers can lose this football game, but I think Rutgers wins this game 31-20, 31-24 type game. I just think while your approach to it could happen, I'm taking the opposite approach where UCLA is just kind of rolling over and died. I mean, they lost Chip Kelly in February, and they are coach now. I don't know who he is. That's how irrelevant they are. To me, they just aren't a football team. They're just a group of individuals, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes absolute sense. And so we have a prediction from Duriel for 31-20 Rutgers. And we love different perspectives here because certainly I've been wrong before, well, many times. And I'm going to go with UCLA 26-20.
Well, that's very possible. To me, the most important game remaining on your schedule, if we're talking about this season, is the USC game, which is ironic because you're also a fan of USC. If Rutgers is able to beat USC, I feel like that changes the narrative on Rutgers, even if they go 9-3 or 8-4, because they've beaten a big brand school and a school with more talent than them. Whereas if they go 8-4, 9-3, but they beat UCLA, Minnesota, Maryland, and Michigan State, I feel like Rutgers is still going to be like Happen Your Last Show, where people are like, who cares about Rutgers? Rutgers is an irrelevant football team. But if you beat a big brand, then people will start taking Rutgers and looking at them as they're a capable football team of beating a big brand on a down year.
Yeah, I think you make a great point. I completely agree with you because even if Rutgers has a winning record, if all they're beating are mediocre teams in the Big Ten, then Rutgers really isn't any different from the Rutgers of old. And I think against Wisconsin, they had a chance to change that narrative, and they didn't. So we'll see what happens against UCLA. But if they lose, then I think that they're in deep trouble and there are some systemic issues. What do you think about the Alabama-Tennessee game coming up this Saturday?
I think Tennessee has shown me no reason they should beat Bama. But Alabama, over the last few years, has just played with their food against bad teams, so it wouldn't surprise me if Tennessee won the football game. But I think Alabama's going to win in a low-scoring game. I think it's going to be basically the opposite of 2 years ago, which is going to mess with people's expectations because these are both two great defensive teams. I think Alabama wins this game like 17-14.
That's or definitely a reasonable prediction. I don't know really what to make of Alabama this year. Their defense is struggling. Their run defense is struggling. Their secondary is young and has gotten exposed. I mean, Carson Beck threw for 439 yards against them. And then against Vanderbilt, again, they did not look good. And against South Carolina, they could have easily come out of there with a loss. And I'll tell you this, and people don't like when I say this, but I am not a huge fan of Jalen Milroe. I think that Milroe is an amazing athlete, but I don't think he's a quarterback. And I think in many ways he holds Alabama back from, implementing DeBoer's full offensive scheme. But that brings us to the SEC. So I don't know what to make of the SEC this year. A lot of crazy stuff has happened. So, if you had to say who are the top 5 teams in the SEC from 1 to 5, who would you pick? In my opinion, there's a lot more parity, and the teams are slightly weaker. So who would you say are in the top 5 in the SEC?
So to me, can I do it in tiers because I feel like that's an easier way of doing it, and it represents the guys.
Yes.
So Texas is in a tier all by themselves. They are clearly the best team in the SEC and maybe the best team in the country. I wouldn't say I'd be shocked if anybody else other than Texas won the SEC championship game, but them, Alabama, and Georgia, or Georgia and Alabama is the only teams I can see Texas losing to just because of the talent level. And then underneath Texas, I have Georgia, Alabama, and LSU as in their own little tier of teams that are capable of winning a playoff game. They're talented enough to. They've had good enough coaches to where I think they can win a playoff game, proven coaches before. And then the 5th spot is really difficult, but I got to give Texas A&M the respect. I know they lost to Notre Dame and they looked horrible at the beginning of the season, but they're 5-1 and 3-0 in the SEC. And I've got to put some respect on it that they're dominating against teams like Missouri and stuff like that, where I know Missouri isn't good or anything, but if all you do is just win games, I got to put some respect at some point. We're halfway through the season. You're 5-1. That's got to mean something.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think they're, in my view, there's more parity in the SEC, and the teams are not as strong as in recent years, but there are tiers. And I do agree that Texas is at the top of the mountain right now. They look like a complete team. Where I start to get a bit uncertain is when I look at the other teams. Georgia, for example. When I saw Georgia against Alabama, that first half, Georgia's defense looked lost. And I was wondering, did Glenn Schumann even prepare this defense? Because they looked like they were on their heels, didn't know what was coming. And it doesn't seem to me to be a Georgia team that is the old school Georgia teams or the Georgia teams of 2021, 22. And so my defense is their defense is a concern for me. The second thing that concerns me about Georgia is Carson Beck. He's a good quarterback, but I'm not sure how he is under pressure. 3 interceptions and 1 fumble against Alabama was problematic. Alabama, like I said, their defense does not look good. The rushing defense is, they're getting gashed. The secondary is weak. And although, they had a game-winning interception against Georgia, Vanderbilt essentially ran all over them, and Carson Beck even had 439 yards. When it comes to LSU, my biggest concern about LSU is their defense. I'm not sure if the defense is good enough, and I can't wait to see Alabama go at LSU. And as far as A&M goes, I think Elko is doing a great job, and I think they certainly have to be, in the mix. But is there any other team in the SEC that you think could sneak up and challenge for and maybe go to the SEC championship?
Honestly, I just don't see anybody else that's capable of it. Ole Miss was going to be that team, but they've already got 2 SEC losses, and they have to play Georgia still. So I think they've played themselves out of that. Missouri looks like fraud since the beginning of the season. They look like outside of Florida State, the most overrated team in the country to start the season. Tennessee has no offense at all, which is going to be great for your Alabama Crimson Tide. Their defense is going to look incredible just because of who they're playing this week. So all those problems will go away. And then and the only other 2 above 500 SEC teams is Vanderbilt and Arkansas. Does anybody believe they're capable of this level of consistency? I doubt it. I don't think they have the talent or coaching to deal with this for an entire season. I mean, they're both nice stories. Both are 4-2, which is unexpected, but I just don't see them putting it up for a season. So I bet you one of those 5 teams, there will be a SEC matchup, a championship with one of those 5 teams I listed.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Tennessee, I was high on Tennessee at the beginning of the year, but after that loss to Arkansas, and even after their mediocre offensive performance against Oklahoma, I don't think they're going to contend. Ole Miss, Ole Miss loses to Kentucky, look lifeless in doing so. And now with 2 losses. But that brings me to one point. You're a Kentucky fan, and when I watch Kentucky play, they are an extremely physical team who's capable, in my opinion, of beating anybody. And apart from the loss at South Carolina, do you think there's a chance they could win out and contend?
I win out's a bit strong because we play Texas at Texas. But we're capable of winning every game outside of that game, in my opinion, on the schedule because we don't play anybody's elite or anything like that. It's just Kentucky has a problem with getting in their own way with poor execution, stupid penalties. And I know this is a Rutgers fan. We're not talented enough to where we can overcome us beating ourselves. And I think that's what you saw in the Wisconsin game and I saw in the Vanderbilt game. If you keep committing holding penalties, if you keep not missing blocks and missing assignments, dropping balls and stuff, you're going to lose to anybody in the country, and you're going to lose bad.
Yeah, I agree with you. Still, I think this is one of Kentucky's best teams in recent years. In that game against Ole Miss, they were extremely impressive. So one last question for you. Who's the best team in the country?
That's hard. That is a hard question. I'm going Texas right now.
Okay. I'm going to talk about that a bit later on in the show, but Texas is looking good. Who do you think was the better team, Oregon or Ohio State?
Ohio State.
Me too. I think Oregon only won because they were in Outson, and I think Ohio State would beat them on a neutral field. But
Josh Payton said he had FanDuel run the odds again if they played a neutral field. Ohio State's 2.5-point favorites, according to what he found out. So
I would agree with that. I think they are the better team. Great conversation, Dariel. Anything else?
Oh no, looking forward to the rest of your show. Your first show, man, it did really well. It had like over 100 views, which is really good for your first time show. I just hoping some callers put some respect on Rutgers football because all football matters.
Well, thanks, man. I really appreciate the support, and I hope people keep tuning in. It's going to be an exciting show, and I appreciate your great comments.
No problem. Looking forward to hearing the rest of the show.
Thanks so much. Take care. All right, that was Duriel with outstanding commentary, Kentucky fan, and really offered some great comments for the discussion, which kind of segues into Big Ten this year. We're going to talk briefly about the Big Ten and ultimately the national ranking. So who are the best teams in the Big Ten after a weekend in which Ohio State loses to Oregon in Outson Stadium and Rutgers gets trounced? Penn State defeats USC 33-30 in overtime. So I'm going to give my controversial Big Ten rankings, which I'm sure many would disagree with. But before I do that, I want to welcome onto the show Jackson Johnson from Alabama at the voice of college football. Jackson, thanks so much for joining us. How's it going?
It's going pretty good. How are you doing tonight, Adam?
I'm doing great. Thanks.
Oh man, it's gonna be a wild one seeing what happens with Rutgers UCLA, because like UCLA, they're basically just trying to get through this year. It's just been a disastrous year, which I mean, let's be real, it was gonna be, especially with that athletic department. I mean, the way they have run that football program. Matter of fact, that whole athletic department as whole, like everyone in that athletic department that handled the Chip Kelly situation throughout the last few months he was there, all need to be fired. Like seriously, that somebody just needs to walk in there and just tell them, "You're all fired. Get out of here."
Yeah, it's been a disaster for UCLA. I do think that UCLA, even though they're 1-5, is one of those 1-5 teams that's a bit deceiving because they're not good, but they're good enough to challenge a team like Rutgers. And I think they're going to go in there with a chip on their shoulder looking for their second win. And I think Rutgers, based on their performance against Wisconsin and coupled with a few serious injuries, I think it's going to be UCLA and Piscataway, and that rhymes. But anyway, yeah, I think it's UCLA's game to win. Alabama, Tennessee, I don't know how to predict that game. I tend to think Jalen Milroe is going to do enough to win, and the Alabama defense is going to do enough to hold Tennessee to 17 to 20 points. I could see a 27 to 20. It's 27 to 20 or 27 to 17 victory. What do you think?
Oh, I picked Alabama to win 28-24 on Monday's edition of Crimson Tide Live, and I just got to tell you that's a toss-up. I know, like my buddy Jeffrey had only taught sports. He was talking about it being a toss-up game where he was like, I don't like having picked Tennessee, but reluctantly I'm going to. I think Alabama's still got some juicy juice against Tennessee.
So how do you think it affects the players when they go to a place like Rocky Top and there's 105 or so thousand fans? How difficult is it for them to play in that atmosphere? And do you think it's going to affect their performance?
Little bit, but we didn't think going to Vanderbilt was going to affect their performance, but here we are. It did.
Yeah, I agree. And you mentioned Jeffrey. Jeffrey, another great commentator at Indiana at the voice of college football. But as far as Jeffrey goes, what I will say is that Signetti's undefeated reign comes to an end in Columbus, but that's another story for another day. What do you think of Georgia, Texas?
Oof, that's a tight one. I'm thinking that Georgia wins that one, but I do believe that Texas could still be a national champion in all college football. Like their performance against Georgia, regardless of how it goes, will not change my mind on what's 2024 looking like. I mean, to me, the two national champions, like the two teams that are going to be national champions, like it's either going to be Texas or it's going to be Oregon.
Okay.
Would not surprise me.
Well, here's the thing about Texas, and I could be wrong, but I completely agree with you. I think Georgia's going to go in there. Their backs are against the wall. They're the underdog. No one thinks they're going to win, and everyone's already anointed Texas the number one team in the country. I think Georgia's going to go in there and beat them by a field goal, and I think they're going to expose Texas as an offense that can be stopped and a defense that, while very good, is not impenetrable. And I think if Michigan had a good quarterback when they played Texas, Texas could have been in trouble. So while I would say Texas is number one right now, I think that's going to end on Saturday when Georgia has the upset. Any other thoughts?
For sure. But I mean, for me, I don't think it's going to matter who wins the SEC or Big Ten because, like, regardless who wins either one of those conferences, we're seeing teams getting in from those conferences. Question will be, will we see an at-large team from the ACC and the Big 12? And, from what we're seeing from Iowa State, BYU, maybe if they're unbeaten going into the Big 12 title game, it could happen. Pittsburgh, they are one team to definitely watch out for because, I mean, they're unbeaten for the first time in quite a long time.
Yeah, that's very true. And I believe their quarterback, Eli Holstein, a former Alabama backup who's been doing well. But I'm glad you brought that point up because when I think of ACC, I think of Clemson and nobody else. When I think about the Big 12, I think of nobody. And that's the problem I kind of have with these at-large bids for not at-large bids, these automatic bids for conference champions. I mean, why are we giving automatic bids to conference champions if they're not really among the best 12 in the country? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a crying shame, honestly. It really is. And I do think that strength of schedule should be looked at a little more. And strength of victory should definitely be looked at. That is the go-to when having a playoff team. I mean, I can tell you this. The playoff committee, they need a whole overhaul. There needs to be some new members.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the last few years, we've had so much controversy, including last year. And what I've proposed previously is that why should there be a set number of playoff teams? At the end of the year, most people can reasonably agree on who the teams are that should compete for the national championship. In some years, it might be 4. In some years, it might be 6. Like last year, people were debating, should Ohio State, Georgia, and Florida State be in? My answer to that would be, sure, put them all in, but don't necessarily have a 12-team playoff. Most people would have identified 7 teams last year that should compete for the national championship. So have a playoff then with those 7 teams. And there might be a play-in game or some, kind of things we have to fix to make that work. But why not do that instead of having that controversy? And by the way, why are we trusting this playoff committee? Most of them are filled with academics and bureaucrats. What do they know about college football?
Do they stay up late till 2 a.m. watching college football? I think not.
No, and I would refer you to the show, the late night Voice of College Football show on Sunday, which was one of the best ever. And every week has absolutely great commentary and absolutely great guests. It was absolutely fantastic. Jackson's on that show and does a great job.
I did my best on After Dark, and this Sunday I'll be subbing for Ben because he's going to a concert.
Well, guys, be sure to turn into those shows because they are outstanding, as last Sunday's show exemplifies. Anything else?
Appreciate it. And one more thing, about like Rutgers, and then I'll tell the friends and the cashiers at Publix about Rutgers Live. But if Rutgers and Illinois win out, will there be a possibility of Rutgers, Illinois being in College Game Day in Piscataway, New Jersey, the birthplace of college football, for the first time in school history, or will that have to wait another year?
It doesn't have to wait another year. That would be amazing. It should be. College Game Day should visit Piscataway. That would be a great game. And it's funny because I just flew to New Jersey yesterday to visit my mother. I'll be here for a few days. And there's a lot of Rutgers fans around here and a lot of Rutgers fans who are worried about the UCLA game and the direction of this program. We beat UCLA, and we have a good showing moving forward. If Illinois comes to Piscataway, I want to see Herb Street, Corso, Nick Saban, and the gang there for a Rutgers victory over the Fighting Illini.
Oh man, like I think I remember like the last time Rutgers played UCLA. I think it was in 2000. I think it was in 2008. I'm not sure, but it wasn't 08. It was Rutgers, North Carolina. But
Okay.
I thought I saw Rutgers and UCLA playing each other, but it must have been somebody else. But it's like, good Lord, it's been a long while. But I will tell you that. Oh yeah. But I will tell you, though, if you love top-notch commentary on Rutgers football, check out Adam Lamparello on SC Trojans 97 on X, and check him out on Adam Lamparello on Instagram. Tell all your friends, your families, and the cashiers at Publix about the magic that he brings every week on Rutgers at the Voice of College Football.
Thanks so much, Jackson. We appreciate it.
You're welcome, man. Anytime.
Have a great night. Thank you. All right, that's Jackson Johnson from the Alabama Voice of College Football. Fantastic commentator, and offered again some great comments tonight. And as we're talking about the Big Ten, who really are the best teams in the Big Ten? I was thinking about that today, and I thought, even though my rankings might be controversial, I'm going to rank the Big Ten based on who I think the best teams are and look forward to your comments, because the games have revealed a lot in terms of the talent levels and the schemes and the coaches and their likelihood of getting to the playoff and contending for the national title. So, Big Ten rankings, I'll get right to it. Who is number one in the Big Ten? Drum roll. The number one team in the Big Ten, Ohio State. I don't want to hear about the Ducks. Ohio State was the better team. They went to Outson, which is a very difficult place to play. And the reason it's difficult is because it's so loud, because the fans are so close to the field. And now I'm not just going to say, because it was a road game. Rutgers looked to me like the better team. And for that reason, I'm going to put them number one. Number two, the Ducks of Oregon. Dylan Gabriel is a very good quarterback. The Ducks do have a defense, and the Ducks did pull out the victory. If Will Howard had slid 1 second earlier, that may not be the case, but he didn't. So Oregon is number two. Number three, from Unhappy Valley, or should I say Happy Valley, the Penn State Nittany Lions. Penn State, in my view, looks like a Penn State team. A bit better of an offense, not a spectacular offense, but a very good defense. And James Franklin and the Nittany Lions went into the Coliseum in Los Angeles and won overtime 33-30 after being down by 14 points. You have to give Penn State credit for that. And Drew Aller has done a much better job this year. So Penn State's at number three. Number four, it pains me to say this in part, and I'm just half kidding, but at this time, I'm going to have to go out on the ledge here and say number four goes to Indiana, the Indiana Hoosiers, with a great coach, Signetti. Undefeated so far, although I would argue they are on borrowed time and will lose substantially against Ohio State. Indiana's for real this year. And at this point, I haven't seen a better team than Indiana other than Penn State, Oregon, and Ohio State. So for now, it's Indiana. Number five, the Fighting Illini of Illinois, a tough, gritty team. And I'm putting them at number five, not because they are so good, but because the rest of the Big Ten generally has been so average, even though there are other teams that I've ranked below Illinois that, in my view, are better. Talent-wise, roster-wise, they are not performing at a level that I think Illinois is performing at. So Illinois is number five. Number six, anybody's ever been to Kinnick Stadium knows that it's tough to play there, the Iowa Hawkeyes. Iowa last year suffered under the reign of Deacon Hill, one of the worst quarterbacks to come through the Big Ten in a while, and under an offensive coordinator that just didn't get the job done, let's put it mildly. Now, Cade McNamara hasn't been great this year, but Iowa's defense is excellent as always under Kirk Ferentz, and Iowa has one of the best running backs in the country. So Iowa is a team to watch out for. Number 7, we go to Ann Arbor, Michigan. The Wolverines, last year's national champions, still a very good team. We saw against USC how Michigan's defensive line dominated the USC offensive line and ultimately came back with a victory late in the fourth quarter. Problem with the Wolverines, they have a quarterback problem. They started out with a Davis Warren problem. Davis Warren had a good arm, threw some good passes, but threw a lot of passes to the wrong team with 6 interceptions, including 3 against Arkansas State. Then we had the Alex Orji era. Alex Orji, great athlete, never turns the ball over. The problem is he can't throw the ball either. And as such, Alex Orji then gave way to Jack Tuttle in the Washington game. And Jack Tuttle breathed some life into that game against Washington and brought them back. But then Jack Tuttle got the turnover bug. So what we have at Michigan is a quarterback problem. Michigan just doesn't have a quarterback to run that offense, and that is the reason why this will be a good but not great year for Michigan. Number 8, and this was a tough call, at 3-3, the USC Trojans. USC came within one play of defeating the Wolverines in Ann Arbor. They came very close to defeating Minnesota. They were up 14 on Penn State. So USC is one of those teams where they're probably the best 3-3 team in the country. But it's not enough for Lincoln Riley to say, well, we're 6 plays away from being 6-0. No, you have to win those games. You lost those games, okay? Against Michigan, you allowed a long run in the fourth quarter that set up the touchdown. Against Minnesota, Miller Moss threw an interception in the end zone, okay? Against Penn State, you were completely outplayed in the second half. And, as Brian Kelly said last year after LSU lost to Alabama, good is not good enough, and that is the case with USC. Number 9, Lincoln, Nebraska, the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Nebraska's a good team. They're not a great team. Dylan Raiola is good. He's not great, but they are a physical team. They defeated Rutgers 14-7, and they're going to be in every game. They're a tough team, but like I said, a good but not great team. This is where you get really a lot of parity, where the rankings become very difficult to make. So who comes after Nebraska? Well, this was a tough one, but I'm going to go with the Scarlet Knights of Rutgers. Now, Rutgers, let's be clear. You're ranked this low after you started out 4-0 with victories over Virginia Tech 26-23 and Washington 21-18. Then you blow it, okay, against Wisconsin the way you did. Completely unacceptable. You lose by a touchdown against Nebraska when you couldn't get the ball in from the 3-yard line. You blocked a field goal that didn't lead to any points. You faked a field goal that should have led to 3 points. Rutgers, you are at a turning point now, and UCLA will tell the story about whether you're going up or you're going down. And it's really tough after Rutgers, but I'm going to take the unconventional pick and put UCLA after Rutgers. I think UCLA, although 1-5, is a team that has been in games against some of the top teams in the country, or at least top 10 teams. They were close against LSU in the first half. They were close relatively against Penn State for a half. And I know one half is not a ball game, but the fact that they were able to hang with some of the top teams shows me that they have at least some talent and ability to compete. And I think that that's going to show this Saturday at Rutgers with a victory in Piscataway. Now, I'm not going to rank the remainder of the teams because I'm not so sure that there's a point to doing so because they're all really bad. The Spartans of Michigan State, East Lansing, Yes, a nice little city there, but not with a very good football team. The Maryland Terrapins, it's not their year. Northwestern, not much to say about Northwestern. And Purdue, an engineering school, might want to stick with engineering. So I'm not going to rank those teams because they're both equally bad. So we'll just put them in the bad category. The takeaway is number 1 is Ohio State. Number 2 is Oregon. Number 3 is Penn State. 4 Indiana. 5 Illinois. Let's see if Indiana can keep it that way. Before I get on to our final segment, which is what I believe are the top 25 teams currently, we have a call from Mac. Mac, welcome to the show. Thanks for calling in. What is on your mind? Are you now a Rutgers fan?
Well, thank you for having me again. I wasn't able to catch the Rutgers game this week, but I did see that they lost. I wondered if you had any thoughts on that. I know you might have covered it already. I was just able to get into the show now.
No, that's a great question, and I appreciate that. Rutgers lost 42-7 to a Wisconsin team that was defeated 42-10 by Alabama and 38-21 by USC. So Wisconsin was nothing special coming in, and they completely dominated Rutgers. They dominated them in time of possession, first downs, third down conversions, passing yards, rushing yards, stopped Rutgers at critical times. In every phase of the game, they dominated physically. And my point in reviewing the Rutgers game was not simply that they got outplayed. It was that they lacked the intangibles. Rutgers was 4-1 going into that game with victories on the road against Virginia Tech and against Washington at home. And they had a home game against a traditionally good team in which they could have established themselves as relevant in the Big Ten. Instead, they came out and were lifeless. They had no heart. They had a weak mindset. Didn't even look like they wanted to be there. And my point is that, for those players, they should have come out with a hunger and a passion to say, this is the game where we get over the hump and we show that Rutgers is a contender in the Big Ten and not the bottom dweller that they have been for the last 50 years. They didn't do that. And when Coach Greg Schiano in the post-game press conference said one of the problems was that we didn't do all the little things correctly, with all due respect, Coach, I don't think you're wrong. I don't think you're right. I'm sorry. I think you're wrong because what happened was they did not come in with the psychology, the mindset, and the passion to win, and it showed.
That's a very thorough assessment. Thank you. Thanks, then I wanted to shift down to the South a little bit. This week we saw teams like Alabama and Georgia barely scraping by to beat unranked opponents. So I wanted to see what you think about that. If I remember correctly, you were a fan of Alabama football. So what do you think about their 2-point victory over unranked South Carolina?
I am a fan of Alabama football and USC football. Alabama has been a disappointment. So it was, I would say, pretty much expected that Alabama would undergo some type of transition period when Nick Saban retired in February and Kalen DeBoer came on. And Kalen DeBoer is a fantastic coach. He was great at Sioux Falls. He was great at Washington and Fresno State. But there was a transition in which we lost some top players, such as Caleb Downs and Isaiah Bond, who's at Texas, and Downs at Ohio State. Having said that, it's still one of the most talented rosters in the country. And after the first half against Georgia, in which they were up 28-0, it looked like the most talented team in the country. But after that first half against Georgia, it's been all downhill since. Carson Beck torched that secondary for 439 yards, most of them in the second half. As we know, Vanderbilt scored almost at will on a weak Alabama defense. And then South Carolina literally had victory in its hands with the ball with 40 seconds left at midfield after that successful onside kick and sacked Milroe 4 times, and Milroe had 2 interceptions in that game. So what's the issues with Alabama? Number 1, I am not a big fan of Jalen Milroe. A great athlete, but not a very good quarterback, and I think it holds Alabama back, and I think it holds back DeBoer from implementing his full scheme. Number 2, a weak secondary. A talented but young secondary that is giving up too many yards, and a defensive line that's getting absolutely no push, and a defensive coordinator, Kane Womack from South Alabama, who in my view is over his head. So what does this mean for Alabama? I think Alabama may go to Tennessee and win, but they're going to lose a second game, and I think it's going to come in Baton Rouge in Death Valley against the LSU Tigers. So I see Alabama, yes, being a playoff team, but losing in the playoffs and not competing for the national title.
So then next week we see Georgia going up against number 1 ranked Texas. Do you have any predictions going into that game?
Yes, my prediction is that Georgia is going to go into Austin and win the game. I think they're going to win by 3, and I'll tell you why. Georgia is a prideful program. Georgia, back-to-back national champions, and they have a head coach, Kirby Smart, who is one of the best coaches, if not the best in the country. They have their backs against the wall. They know that another loss is going to make it difficult for them to make the playoffs. I mean, they could still make the playoffs, but it'll make their path a bit harder. And I think they're going to come in this game playing with pride and determination. And I think that Texas has not played anybody yet of anyone close to Georgia's caliber. And so we really don't know how good Texas is. I think they're a very, very good team. But I think it's time for Georgia to break out and be the Georgia that Georgia is supposed to be. And they were close to that in the second half against Alabama, but they haven't put together a complete game yet, except for the game against Clemson. I think they're going to do it this time and come out with a 24-21 victory.
Well, and I know you said right before I got on we were going to talk about the top 25, but kind of rolling into that, do you think that Georgia and Alabama and by extension Texas have fair placement in that top 25 as 1, 5, and 7 respectively?
I think that at this point it's probably fair because of Georgia's loss to Alabama, because of the way they struggled against Kentucky. I might have them at 4, maybe at 3, but I don't think the 5 ranking is unreasonable. As far as Alabama being at number 7, I'd probably have them at 6, maybe 5. Because I do think that even though I'm not a huge fan of Jalen Milroe, he is an amazing athlete, and they do have the playmakers to really compete against anyone if they are playing on their game. So I think that we may quibble about 1 or 2 spots, but I think generally the rankings are accurate.
All right, well, those are all the questions I had. Thank you for having me.
Mac, thanks for calling in. Call in anytime.
Have a good one.
Take care. All right, and then we have Ryan. Ryan, I know Ryan and Mac, they're both repeat callers, so they must have liked the first show. So, Ryan, what's going on? Aren't you the Georgia fan?
Yes, I am.
So, how are you doing?
Good.
Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. I was a little late to the show today. I took time away from I just got out of my college mock trial meetings to come over here and
mock trial is I'm going to make a pitch for mock trial for all undergraduates throughout the country. If you want to learn how to be a lawyer or learn how to argue, coach mock trial. It's funny you say that because I actually coached the mock trial team at my school. And
really?
Yeah, a talented bunch of people. And it's funny because mock trial is tough, but I hear from students years later after mock trial, they say, "Oh, that was really a good experience." So good luck to you in mock trial. My advice for you would be invest the time in it. It's going to be worth it, and it's going to serve you well, especially if you want to be a lawyer.
Yeah, we're going on to our 3rd hour now. So it's been a grind, but sure I'm looking for it to pay off here in a couple weeks.
Well, that's why you're on this show right now. It's a good break and a worthy one. So what's on your mind?
Well, you know what? I not start, but they've seemed to cool off a little bit recently. Two pretty big losses in back-to-back weeks. And at the beginning of the year, it looked like Rutgers might be a competitive program in the Big Ten, but the last 2 weeks, it seemed that maybe not. But at the same time, your traditional Big Ten powerhouses, your Michigans, I guess now USC, those schools, Washington coming off of a national championship berth last year, they don't look great either.
Yeah.
Michigan is, down to 24 and arguably should be unranked. But then you've got a school like Indiana who pulled a coach out of what was an FCS school, now at FBS school, James Madison. And they have turned their program around seemingly, at least this year, at a 6-0 start, and don't seem to be slowing down anytime soon. Do you maybe look to their blueprint? And I know, Greg Schiano, he's been there. He's kind of coached Rutgers through arguably the period of one of their greatest success, in recent modern college football, not going back to the Rutgers of old and the pre-World War II style. But do you maybe look at one of those programs as a blueprint to build off of? Maybe dip into that transfer portal, get you a quarterback, get you a running back, or receivers or what have you, and look to kind of what Florida State did last year. Go get some guys out of the portal, but also develop the guys you have, and use the portal guys as a stepping stone to developing your own prospects, your own players.
That's an outstanding question. Thank you for that. I think when it comes to Rutgers, there's three things that are at issue, two of which encompass what you're saying. First, Greg Schiano is a great coach, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for him, but he's got to be able to motivate his players. They have got to have the intangibles. You're 4-1. You just came off a tough loss against Nebraska where you should have won the game. That Wisconsin game represented a chance for you to get over the hump and show you're relevant in the Big Ten rather than a bottom dweller that you have been for the last half century. They came out flat, lifeless, and with no heart. If you're going to have players that perform like that under pressure and with a chance to put this program on the map, that's a serious problem and doesn't bode well for them for the rest of the season. Number two, Rutgers is going to lose a lot of seniors this year. They've got to recruit, and they've got to use that portal. They have got to get some 4 and 5 stars on their team. Now, how do you do that? You do it in one of two ways. Either you buy the players out of high school by outbidding the Georgias and the Alabamas, or number two, you get them when they don't get a starting job their first or second year and are pissed off because they don't have any playing time. Then you offer them money and say, come here, and you'll start right away. So I agree with you. They have to hit the portal, or they've got to buy recruits. The third thing is, Rutgers needs to look to the future and understand that the way to success is going to be to play disciplined, precision football where you have an explosive offense and a sound defense. Greg Schiano is not going to be there forever, which brings me to my point. They have to look ahead 5-10 years from now because Schiano has already said this is his last stop. When he retires, who's on the horizon for Rutgers? Those coaches and those the coaches in less, let's say, prestigious schools, FCS schools, finally got it right. That's who you want. Look at where Signetti came from, and look at where he is now. Look at where Kalen DeBoer came from, Sioux Falls, Fresno State, Washington. Okay, now DeBoer's at Alabama, and Signetti is coaching an undefeated Indiana team. So sometimes the answer is not to get the most prestigious coach out there like an Urban Meyer or a Brian Kelly. It's to get the up-and-coming coach who has the hunger and the passion and the ambition to win a national title and will instill that in his players. So what I would say is, number one, the players don't have the intangibles, need to have them. Use the portal more, buy recruits, get one of those FCS coaches, and Rutgers may have a chance to become the Big Ten contender that they showed they were not last week against Wisconsin.
Yeah, and I have to give some reprieve to Rutgers. I mean, going into Camp Randall for any team is not easy. But at the same time, they showed very little heart, very little want, very little urgency in that game. But
yeah.
I mean, if you're Schiano, what do you tell your players?
Oh, that's funny you say that. So what I would say to your comments, and I'm very disappointed to have to say this to you because it's going to make Rutgers look even worse. They were actually at home in Piscataway.
Were they really?
They were at their home field. And it's completely reasonable, and I hope the audience hears this, completely reasonable to think they were at Camp Randall considering how terrible they played. You would have thought automatically they're at Camp Randall because, God forbid, they could have never played this way in Piscataway. Well, Unfortunately, they did. So that's why it's so incredibly disappointing. And the second part of your question, sorry, I got so angry thinking about it, that what does Schiano have to tell his players? Well, let me tell you what Schiano told the press. At the post-game conference, he said, this performance was unacceptable. And he said, the reason we lost was because we didn't do the little things correctly. And I said earlier on the show, that's absolutely wrong, Coach Schiano, with all due respect. You did all the big things wrong. And you did the biggest thing wrong, which was you did not instill in your players the motivation, the hunger and the passion and the pride and performance necessary to get over that hump and become relevant in the Big Ten. I think he missed the point, and I don't think it bodes well for Rutgers. And that's why, Ryan, I am predicting a 1-5 UCLA team to go into Piscataway this Saturday and come out with the victory.
Really?
Yes.
I don't. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be hard for for people to show up and want to go to the game when you were at home against a somewhat struggling Wisconsin team who lost their starting quarterback for the year against Alabama, and so going and having to play a lesser team.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you ask your fans to show up for that game when you clearly didn't seem to care against a game that absolutely mattered a whole lot more for the Big Ten than 1-5 UCLA team did? I mean, this is a UCLA team who I think took them to week 3 or 4 to score their first offensive touchdown. And so, and it's weird to say that UCLA might be looking to make a statement against Rutgers, but that's kind of where I tend to go with these things. I mean, it'd be pretty. What, Rutgers is now 4-3. So,
Rutgers now is 4-2. No, they're 4-2.
So you go in and you make a statement. If you're UCLA, first-year head coach. I mean, I agree. I think that Rutgers loses, and I think Rutgers loses by 14.
Well, I predicted that Rutgers would lose too, and it's difficult to predict a Rutgers loss to a 1-5 UCLA team when they're at home. But you mentioned something about the fans at Rutgers, and I'm going to address this to all the students at Rutgers University. Your showing against Wisconsin was pathetic. Let me repeat, pathetic. After one of the few good plays that Rutgers had, there were people clapping in the stands. It sounded like a high school graduation. Now let's compare that to Death Valley. Let's compare that to Athens, Georgia. Let's compare that to Alabama. Let's compare that to it used to be the Horseshoe at Ohio State. Rutgers, the students, the administration, you should be ashamed of yourself. You should have shown out for that Rutgers game like Alabama showed out when they played Georgia. They had the whole state behind them. Rutgers, you didn't have a city behind you. And you certainly didn't have the players behind you because they came out looking like they wanted to be somewhere else. And that's really a shame because if you really want to be successful, well, then you better do the things necessary to achieve that success. And they didn't do it. So I agree with you that Rutgers, in my opinion, at this point, has not shown me anything to believe that they can defeat UCLA.
And, it's funny you mentioned the crowd interaction, and then you mentioned Georgia. Kirby Smart, after the Auburn game, said that the fans have to be better, that they have to be louder. And I don't know if you watched the Mississippi State game at all, but it was even on TV, it was a night and day difference between the Auburn game and the Mississippi State game. I mean, usually you go into Sanford Stadium and you can't. If you're a lineman, you can't hear your quarterback.
Right.
And against Auburn, that didn't happen. But against Mississippi State, I mean, there were multiple procedural penalties before the snap. It was a totally different atmosphere. You could even perceive that through the TV. Right. And I think that absolutely plays a major factor in big football games. I mean, Georgia against Bama, like you mentioned, there was false starts, there was delayed games, there was a little shift. There was a lot of procedural penalties Georgia doesn't typically incur because we don't typically play at those states. Georgia historically doesn't have to play Alabama every year. We don't have to play at Texas. We don't have to play LSU at Death Valley. And it absolutely makes a difference. And I think not having the support of the fans behind you can absolutely make a team play better or worse. So
yeah, I think you make a great point, and I think you're 100% right. I mean, look, a few years ago when Alabama played New Mexico State, they won, I believe, 62-3. And Nick Saban at the post-game press conference was mad at the fans because they left in the third quarter. And he said, we need you here because you do give us the kind of advantage that home field advantage is supposed to give. I mean, when you're going on the road to Athens, you know what that environment is going to be like. When you're going to Death Valley, you know how loud it's going to be at LSU. When you're going to Tuscaloosa, as the Georgia Bulldogs did a few weeks ago, you know it's going to be a hostile environment. When you go to Rutgers, I don't know. It doesn't feel like you're going anywhere except to a neutral site.
Yeah.
And so all of you students at Rutgers with your high SAT scores and your big egos and your high GPAs, you didn't show much on Saturday, and now you're saddled with a 42-7 loss, and we're the embarrassment of college football. And as a New Jersey native, I can tell you, that's not something we're going to tolerate. So get off your ass and get to the games if you want Rutgers to be something more than the laughingstock of college football.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very well said. I mean, as I stated last week, Rutgers isn't a team that's historically relevant. I mean, outside of 100 years ago.
Well, Rutgers could beat a very good high school team.
Yeah, I mean, they could be
at this point after that performance.
And they could be really competitive in like Texas is 7A.
Yeah, they could go compete, against South Lake, maybe. Maybe they could compete against IMG.
Yeah.
But I say this half jokingly, Rutgers, but you know what? If Coach Schiano is not going to chastise you, I will. You sucked on Saturday and you embarrassed New Jersey. And if you do it again, you're going to have even fewer fans and you're going to have a lot more embarrassment and a lot more of the same legacy you've had in the last 50 years. And I'm sorry, that's not acceptable. Get your ass out on there against UCLA and show that you're something more than what you showed against the Badgers.
Absolutely.
Anything else, Ryan?
Not this week.
Well, listen, we really appreciate you calling in. You're always welcome to call in. Always good comments. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
You too.
All right, everyone. That was Ryan calling. Ryan's from Georgia, Georgia Bulldogs fan. Great comments. I want to thank you all for the calls, that have come in, the great comments. If you like this show, hit that like button. If you want to subscribe, please hit the subscribe button. And you're going to tune in the show is going to be, I know it's been on Wednesday today, and last week it was on a different day. It's from now on, we're going to be on Monday at 7 p.m. for the weekly Rutgers show. Monday at 7 p.m. And we will also be on Saturday for a live post-game show after every Rutgers game. So Monday at 7 p.m. and Saturday at after each game for both live shows. Welcome your calls. Last thing I'm going to talk about is who are the top 25 teams in the country. Well, I don't think it's worth going through all top 25 because, in my view, only the top 10 have a legitimate chance of competing. So I'm going to give my ranking right now of the top 10. Number 1. Well, let's start from number 10. Number 10, South Bend, Indiana, Notre Dame. Even though Notre Dame humiliated itself with a loss to Northern Illinois at home, they're a pretty good team. And they're at 10, not because they're that good, but because there's not really any teams that I see as any better. So Notre Dame at number 10. Number 9, Miami. I know Miami has a Heisman Trophy, possibly a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback. I am not sold on Miami yet. And until Miami wins against a team that is in the top 10 and shows themselves to have the type of defense that can compete in the playoffs, I'll say they're very good, but they're not elite yet. Number 8, despite that loss to USC, Garrett Nussmeier and the LSU Tigers have come back, including with a critical win at South Carolina and a win against Ole Miss. LSU, number 8, and they could be higher. Number 7, Tennessee. Tennessee, I'm not as optimistic as, because in recent weeks, including by only scoring 25 points against Oklahoma and losing to Sam Pittman in Arkansas, Tennessee is looking like they peaked too soon and are going in the wrong direction. But at this point, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt over an LSU team that lost to USC, the Notre Dame team that lost to Northern Illinois, and a Miami team that didn't lose, but a Miami team that I'm not really sold on yet. Number 6, Roll Tide, Alabama Crimson Tide. Alabama, terrible loss to Vanderbilt. Close victory, 2 points against South Carolina. But they did defeat Georgia, and they do have playmakers, even though they have a young secondary, and they have a dynamic athlete in Jalen Milroe. Can't ever count the Crimson Tide out. We'll see what happens this weekend against Tennessee, but Alabama remains in the mix. 5th, and probably my most controversial choice, Oregon. Oregon, you heard it here first. You're finished. Your season's over, and I'm going to tell you why. You played at Outson, one of the loudest, rowdiest crowds in college football, played the game of your life against an Ohio State team that is better than you, and that should have defeated you. Oregon, you're very, very good, and you belong in the top 5, and that's it. You're finished. You're not winning the national championship, okay? I was not very impressed with Oregon against Ohio State, and I think Oregon is going to suffer a loss this season, make the playoffs, and lose. And Oregon, as such, you remain at number 5. Number 4, another controversial pick. Let's go to South Carolina, the Clemson Tigers. I know Clemson got beat badly against Georgia, but ever since then, Clemson has been a force. And Clemson has the one thing that wins national championships, and that is defense. Okay? Clemson is going to compete for the national championship, and they are at number 4. Number 3, Kirby Smart and the Georgia Bulldogs. Now, you could look at Georgia one of 2 ways. You could say Carson Beck, 3 interceptions, 1 fumble, including a game-losing interception on the last play in the late 4th quarter, and was down 28-0 in the first half. You could say that. You could also say that Carson Beck passed for 439 yards and torched Alabama's secondary in the second half, and that Georgia was suffering from a number of injuries, including to its defensive line, that hampered its performance. I'm going to go with the latter. I think Georgia is still Georgia, and Kirby Smart is still Kirby Smart. Georgia is still in it, and I believe Georgia will defeat Texas this weekend. They are number 3. Number 2, Columbus, Ohio, the Buckeyes, Ohio State. I know Ohio State lost. I know Will Howard slid too late, but they have a defense. They have dynamic receivers. They have a quarterback in Will Howard that has proven to be better than I expected. Ohio State is very close to being a complete team, and a 1-point loss in Outson Stadium and that crowd on that night doesn't deter me. In fact, the Oregon victory, in my opinion, the Oregon-Ohio State game made Ohio State look better and Oregon worse. Ohio State number 2. Number 1, Austin, Texas. At this point, Texas looks like the most complete team. Quinn Ewers, okay? Isaiah Bond, great receiving corps, and a defense that's improved this year, and head coach and Steve Sarkisian that is a genius with his offensive schemes, and a team that really doesn't have many weaknesses. We'll see this weekend if Texas is as for real as they looked in the Red River rivalry against Oklahoma. Do I think that Oklahoma is a great team? I think they're a good team. Do I think that they're fantastic? No. But I think Texas, with their dominance, 31-3, in a rivalry that is, last year was won by Oklahoma, Texas looks good. So to review, Texas 1, Ohio State 2, Georgia 3, Clemson 4, Oregon 5, Alabama 6, Tennessee 7, LSU 8, 9, Miami 10, Notre Dame. I'm sure many people will disagree. Please do. I look forward to reading your comments in the comment section. And with that, we wrap up this edition of Rutgers Live at the college, at the Voice of College Football. We'll be back here on Saturday after the UCLA game for a live show, and look forward to your calls. And then weekly at Monday at 7 p.m. Want to thank you so much for being here. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we will see you next time. Take care.